Hi, I'm Stephen J. Abramson, and I have the great honor to interview the amazing Patty Duke today.
The honor is mutual.
Thank you. It is December 8th, 2013.
My goodness.
And we are in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Yes.
And this is for the Archive of American Television.
And we're in Coeur d'Alene because I live here.
Correct, true.
And they were gracious to come.
And happy to.
And we welcomed them with -5 degrees and snow.
A toasty -5, thank you. Okay. So let's just start at the beginning of this story. What was your name at birth?
Oh, at birth, I was born in Bellevue Hospital, and I've been trying to get back there ever since. My parents named me Anna Marie for two of my aunts, and I don't know who Marie is. It's something my father brought up.
And Bellevue is in New York City, is that right?
Bellevue is that famous hospital in New York City.
Okay.
They deal with all kinds of illnesses, but it's known for its psychiatric division.
Okay, and your last name was Duke at birth?
Duke, yeah.
Okay. So when were you born?
I was born on December 14th, 1946.
A birthday's coming up, right?
Yes, it is, 67.
Where did you grow
See,
up?
I can count.
Oh, yeah. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in New York City, moved to Los Angeles when the television series, The Patty Duke Show, started. Prior to that, I did all my work in New York.
Okay, and what was your father's name and what did he do?
My father's name is John Patrick Duke, and he was in the service. He was in the Navy, and after that, he drank a lot and had odd jobs, and there was a great deal of stress in the family. I get a little shaky when I talk about him because I didn't see him after I was 6 years old, and I used to promise myself, when I grow up, I'm gonna find him, and I'm gonna make him better, and we're gonna live happily ever after. And he passed away at the age of 50. I was 17, and went to his funeral dressed as Patty and Kathy Lane of the Patty Duke Show, because that's what the managers insisted on.
Okay, and we'll talk more about that.
Okay, I'll try not to be so shaky.
That's okay. And what was your mother's name? And what did
My
she do?
mother's name is Frances McMahon Duke. She was a terrific mom. She was a very, we didn't know until much later that she was severely depressed. And that went with my father's drinking, and there you have the mayhem.
So what traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
Oh my. I think I inherited or was taught a real goodness of heart, which in my 20s went kind of awry. But basically, I was taught to be truthful and good-natured. I do think that the genetic thing of alcohol is probably at work in me, and I'm extremely cautious about it. I was diagnosed bipolar in 1980 or 81, which I think probably came from both of them. In the Irish nationality, it runs very high. And we got it from both sides.
Do you have siblings?
I have siblings. My sister, Carol Ann Kennedy, passed in April. She was my big sister. Mm-hmm. She was my hero. And I have a big brother who's younger than my sister. He's 71. And
what's his name?
Raymond.
Okay.
Raymond Thomas Joseph Duke. He was the tough guy. in New York. You know, he never closed his jacket. He walked with his shoulders like that, and he didn't want to. He was the actor that got me into it, but he didn't want to take the time to learn to speak English. He was very New York, and it limited the parts he could play. And then he got involved. He fell in love with a girl younger than him, and her father said, "Stay away." And so he joined the army. That's obviously the solution to everything. And at any rate, they've been married now 35 years. Her name is Lucille.
Excuse me.
Good friend.
So you were working fairly young, but what were you interested in as a young girl?
I wanted to be a nun. I used to play nun with my friends. We would take loose leaf paper and fold it up and make a white thing here and put a scarf over and a white thing here, and we would play school as nuns. Other than that, I didn't really have real interests. I started so young in show business. You know, I was 6 when they were talking about it, and 7 when it happened. So I didn't have any career choices in mind except to be a nun.
Did you, like a lot of children, they sometimes want to grow up and be something or have a certain profession. Did that occur to you, or you were in it so fast that you kind of just went with the ride?
I went with the flow because things were so anxiety-ridden at home. When the Rosses, the couple who managed my career, when they talked my mother into letting me go to live with them, she told me I had to go and I had to be a good girl.
That was John and Ethel Ross, right?
John and Ethel Ross. And in the beginning, as I recall, they were really nice, really sweet, really encouraging, and very important to my education. They did teach me to speak English. They taught me lots of things. But when I became successful, their fear that I would leave them became so great. And remember, this is after the fact. I didn't realize this at the time. That they became rather twisted in their behavior with me. Ethel, dear Ethel, she became an alcoholic. John tried to commit suicide, and it became apparent to me that I needed to get out of there. There was also molestation. Again, I don't think the people who started this meant ever to have that happen. Success can really be a different kind of drug and addiction.
At the beginning with them, how did they come to want to represent you? Was your brother was involved?
They found my brother at the Madison Square Boys Club. A gentleman told them that this kid was really good and he was going to be in a play and they should come watch. They did that. They thought he was good, and they asked him if he wanted to be in show business, which was like asking him if he wanted to be God. And he went home and told my mother that's what he was doing. Now, this was a 12-year-old, but he was a punky New York, I'm going to do it my way kid. He did very well in live television. And again, because he didn't want to work on his New York accent, it became limiting. And then the Rosses wanted to broaden their scope of how many people they were going to represent. And Raymond said, well, I don't know. Some people say my little sister's cute, but I don't know. And again, they came and interviewed me, and I didn't really know what they wanted, but I answered their questions to the best of my ability, and then they made this arrangement with my mom. And what they did, I realized later, was appeal to the part of her that was so insecure, so she felt worthless. And these people said, we can make her a star. We can give her everything you can't. And so I realized she made a great sacrifice. When I was a kid, I didn't think so. I didn't know why she would give me away.
Did you live with them initially, or did you?
Yes. I'm going to drink some water,
Okay.
excuse me.
Feel free to.
It's amazing how much the emotions are still there. Yes, I came to live with them. First, it was going to be temporary, and they upset my mother very much because they took my white communion dress and dyed it pink so I could go on an audition. And I had shoes with a hole in the bottom, and they put cardboard in there. I mean, it's like Dickensian.
How old were you about when you started?
7.
Okay.
60 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And at first it seemed like fun. You know, people were paying attention. They were putting this pretty dress on me. They were telling me I was pretty or cute or whatever, and that if I said these lines the way they said them, I could get this commercial. And that's how it started. They also desperately tried to fix my hair, which was chopped in all kinds of directions. And Mrs. Ross would take painful time to make pigtails. And they told me to sparkle. It's like out of Neely O'Hara. They said, when you go, you sparkle. Well, when I went in there, I sparkled so much my eyes were going crazy. And finally someone reported that. And they said, don't sparkle quite so much.
Did they train you? I mean, did they train you not just in how to behave, but also with how to act or anything like that?
Mrs. Ross didn't get involved in the acting part at all. She was the behavioral conductor. Mr. Ross taught me from the Stanislavski method, and which is really interesting when you're dealing with a 7-year-old child. But he made it understandable and almost appealing. I would get anxious if I didn't come up to his standards, and their standards were very, very high. And when I did get jobs, boy, oh boy, the discipline was there, the work from inside, and I also, you know, at that age, I worked with people like Richard Burton, Lord Olivier. Well, he was a sir then. Kim Stanley. People who were really, they belonged to the world of theater. I got that. I absorbed it. And I've thanked them ever since.
This was during the 50s, during what's been called many times the golden age of television.
Yes, at the tail end of the golden age.
And you were doing live television
absolutely.
dramas. And,
Craft Music Hall, I think they called it.
Yeah, there are a lot of sponsored kind of shows.
Right,
that.
U.S. Steel Hour.
Were you aware as a child when you were doing this? I mean, what kind of awareness did you have about what you were doing? At the time, it was kind of it was the standard for drama on television was often live, unless it was a filmed series. How aware were you about what you were doing?
Very. Instinct worked for me. I would get incredibly nervous just before. And I know that Helen Hayes shared this problem with me, and we worked together in One Red Rose for Christmas. and there were buckets on each side of the stage because we would upchuck just before we went on. Isn't that a strange thing to have in common with Helen Hayes?
But you never know.
Yeah.
A lot of really well-known actors get very nervous.
Some people say, and I think I subscribe to it, if you're not nervous, you don't know what you're doing.
I've heard that. Were you doing commercials at that same time or before that?
Same time, before, after.
What was your first professional job?
I was trying desperately to remember that last night. I think I was an extra in Somebody Up There Likes Me. My brother had a speaking part, but I was told to just get on the bus and be quiet and do as I was told.
What kind of commercials did you do?
I did toy commercials. The best known one, which really annoyed people, was I did a Less Toil commercial. It's so easy when you use less toil. Oh, I took myself everywhere as a kid in New York City, on the subway, on the buses, and people would look at me and they'd look at me and and then they'd go, "Oh my God, you're the little girl that sings Less Toil."
It was a cleaning product, wasn't it?
Cleaning product. And the dolls were there and they were having a party and somehow they spilled their ice cream and I had to clean it up with Less Toil. I also did a Beanie Weenie commercial.
Oh.
The little boy who was doing it with me, he was also a client of the Rosses. His name is Joey Trent. And it was Friday. Catholic. Beanie Weenies had weenies in them.
With pork and, right.
Exactly. And we had to eat it. Mm-hmm. Well, Joey refused. And he pretended to eat it. And I ate it. And I had to go and confess that I ate Beanie Weenies in a commercial.
As a child, how did you prepare for interviews to get jobs? And what role did the Rosses have in preparing you?
The Rosses really prepared me. They would challenge me with all kinds of questions. They would give me the answers if I didn't have them, such as they did for the $64,000 challenge, which was a game show. Eddie Hodges, who was a young actor at the time, and I challenged each other for $64,000. And I wound up going to the Congress because we were given the answers. And when I first went to the Congress and I testified, I lied. And when I finished my testimony, I want to think it's a Southern senator that's in my ear, said, "Now, Anne Marie, have you told us the truth?" "No, sir." And I spilled my guts. It was very traumatic for the Rosses and me. I was opening in The Miracle Worker a week later. And so the bad publicity was very troublesome to them. You know the old saying, any publicity is good publicity. It didn't hurt.
Were they, you were about, like, 12 or so, or at that time?
I lied about that too. I told the Congress I was 10.
Didn't the Rosses want to always represent you as a little younger than you were?
Yes. And fortunately, I stayed short, so that helped them. It's funny, as I'm talking, I'm hearing New York coming back in my voice. What were we talking about?
Well, about the $64,000 challenge. Did you were you aware that they were coaching you for a reason? And did they give you the actual questions and answers at some point?
It was a gradual process. You would go to an office, the production office, and they would say, maybe you should pay attention to X. My category was music. To some country music, What do you know about country music? Nothing. Well, I knew I had to do country music, and they would narrow it down. It's amazing what they went through. Each meeting, they would narrow it down until you got, just before the show, the answers.
Who coached you, or was there a team of people who did it?
I don't remember their names. I'm very good at blocking things like that out. But there were a number of people involved, and sadly, everybody needed a job, and that's how they justified it. But a number of them went to jail.
You said that
I thought I was going to go to jail.
you talked about testifying in a Congress or a committee.
Yes, a
in
committee.
Congress.
That's what I was trying to think of.
Were you, before you just pretty much spilled the beans, were you coached on what to say to them, even
Oh, yeah.
by kind of your team or the Rosses?
The Rosses said, you knew nothing, you saw nothing, they said nothing, your mother didn't know anything, we didn't know anything, and that's what I testified to, until I couldn't.
You mentioned the repercussions about the bad publicity, and right before you were about to open on Broadway. Did that kind of fade away, though?
It did. It did. Occasionally it was brought up through the years because it's interesting. You put two little kids in booths and you make them lie. Or you coach them to lie.
What was the experience like for you actually being on the show, the $64,000
Terrifying.
challenge? Well, it was a live show, wasn't it?
Live show. You're in booths. They called them isolation booths. It was at least 98 degrees in there, if not more. You're trying to remember, are they going to change the question out of order or whatever? So I was very nervous. And one time I licked my lips, as I often do, and I leaned forward to give the answer, and I got a shock from the microphone, and it went out of my head, the answer. And now they also had it tick, 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 get it in 15 seconds or whatever. Fortunately, just before time ran out, it came back, and I don't remember what the answer was.
You did a show with Hal Holbrook called The Brighter Days.
Oh, God, I loved him so.
Was that a soap opera?
Soap opera, yeah.
What was that like for you?
Very nerve-wracking. I had a goodly amount of lines to learn every day, but I just worshipped him. He was so easy and solid, and I really hung my hat on that, on my relationship with him.
The Miracle Worker, the Broadway play, came first for you.
Yes.
How did you get involved with that?
Again, Mr. Ross, whom I've said lots of bad things about, because bad things happened, but he read a little blurb in, I want to call it Box Office or some paper like that, and it said that Arthur Penn and Fred Coe were planning to do a play about Helen Keller. He took that and drilled me for a year. I mean, it's like old jokes. They would blindfold me and rearrange the furniture. They would work on, I would have to be deaf, and then they would make big noises or call my name, and if I answered, well, I wasn't Helen Keller. We didn't work on the fight scene so much because we didn't really even know about it at the time. When it was time to audition, there were several hundred little kids auditioning. I mean, think of that role. So the audition was to smack Anne Bancroft and fight with her. And I was a street kid. She was a street kid. The producer and Arthur Penn were really quite excited by this duo. But they were worried because I hadn't done stage before, and they were worried if I grew, and for some reason they specified 2 inches, I would be too tall and too old. So, again, Mr. Ross and his ingenuity. He took a pair of my size 12 shoes, little girl, size 12, to a shoemaker, and he asked for the shoemaker to put on 2-inch blocks. And he told the story about the shoemaker saying, "No, the little girl will fall down. Little girl." He's, "Just do it." So I went to audition again. This was my last audition. Annie and I beat each other up again. And they still had the concern. So I went over to my little paper bag and I said, "Excuse me, I don't know if this would help, but I have some shoes that have 2-inch heels on them. Could we stand next to each other?" And they laughed so hard, and I got the job.
Were you Patty by then? When did you stop? When did you stop being Anna Marie?
I
And when did
stopped
you become
being
Patty?
Anna Marie. I never stopped being Anna Marie.
Okay.
But one day, Ethel, Mrs. Ross, I was working on my diction, and with no conversation with me about it or anything, she came in the room and said, "Anna Marie is dead. You're Patty now." Little did I know that would cost me 25 years on the couch. But I did what they said, and I was Patty. My sister had the toughest time calling me Patty. She was the one who wanted the family somehow to stay together, even though it was so fractured. And oddly enough, once she went to Patty, she couldn't call me Anna Marie anymore.
So you were always billed as Patty, even when you were doing the live,
Yes.
Yes. Dramas and everything like that. Why Patty?
They changed it at 6 years old or 7 years old.
Why Patty? You know why she chose that name?
I know the story. I don't know if it's actual. The story is Anna Marie was not a cute little name. So they talked to other agents, and somebody said, "Well, Patty McCormick has moved to California to seek her fortune. Why don't you call her Patty?" And that's how it happened. And I have Patty McCormick to blame and to thank. She originated the role of Helen Keller on a Playhouse 90, and rarely gets credit for how wonderful she was.
When you were doing, when you started Miracle Worker on stage at the beginning, were you aware of how special that play was at the
Yes.
time?
I think instinctively I knew. I knew the power of the story from having read books about Helen Keller. And there was an energy between Annie and me that you couldn't put a name to except energy. We never dreamed it would be the hit that it was. Who wants to go and watch a poor little deaf, blind girl stumble around? Well, we opened in Philadelphia. They open in other cities before they bring it to Broadway. We opened in Philadelphia. A theater down the street, the main actor was ill, so a lot of people from that theater came to our theater to see the opening of the show. 18 curtain calls. A lovely woman named Kathleen Comegys, who played Aunt Ev. We were going up the iron stairs, they have in theaters, kind of creaky. And she said, "My darling, never forget this. It happens once in a lifetime." And she was right.
Did you feel was it an added challenge that you were playing a real person in Helen Keller?
Always. There's you owe that person the dignity of who they are. And they deserve respect and as much honesty as you can give them in portraying them.
So the play opened on Broadway in 1959, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And,
October 19th, to be exact.
and you met Helen Keller in the spring of 1960,
Yes.
I believe?
Yes,
So that was
Catherine
over-
Cornell was a friend of hers and had come to the play. And she came backstage and she said, "Would you like to meet Helen Keller?" What am I going to say? No. So she arranged for me to go to Miss Keller's home in Connecticut. Ocken Ridge it was called. And the day came and I went there. And of course, Life magazine came along to take photos. At any rate, when we were brought in to the house and stood at the bottom of the stairs, and she came down the stairs and she didn't hold the railing. There was a thread or thin string, and she had her pinky on that as she glided down the stairs. And oh my God, what a power. What an essence she brought to the room, to the world. We had fun. We wandered around her property. Everything was marked off for her. We sat, the sun was just about going down, and we were sitting at the garden table. And she said, we were conversing about a lot of things, and she would do this to hear you, but she allowed me to spell in her hand. At any rate, and she spoke. We were talking, she said she had been to the doctor recently, and the doctor told her that she had to cut down on her martinis. She was 80 years old, deaf, blind, and no longer mute. And she said to the doctor, "Why? What will happen to me?" That's the kind of humor and grace that she showered on me that day.
So you continued until 1961 with the performance.
Yes, did the shows.
Did that
eight performances a week.
Did that experience meeting her, did that inform you in any way? Did you change anything about your performance?
I can't really say that I did, except that I knew that I was really connected to her. That she knew that I was being her, and she approved it. She never came to the play. Her companion, Polly, had recently passed, and Helen didn't ever really recover from that.
You performed that, I think, over like 700 times or something like
Yeah.
that on stage. How did you do that night after night? How did you keep that fresh? It was a physical performance too.
Yes, the physicality of it helped it stay fresh. If you weren't sharp, you could break something on your body or hurt someone else. I mean, we had to be very precise about what we did in those fight scenes. Even though it looked like it was just happening, sometimes the furniture didn't cooperate. And sometimes things landed in the front row. It was a small theater. And one night, the spoons, I was throwing them, and I should have been throwing them upstage, and I allowed one to go out. And it was Rosalind Russell sitting in the first row. And she took the spoon and very carefully placed it back on the stage because she was afraid maybe we were going to need it.
But it must have made it even more real that the spoons were flying in all directions. I would
Oh,
think.
yeah. Nobody knew what was
Yeah.
going to happen. It was real. And the slaps were real, too.
So what was the experience working with Anne Bancroft for you?
Glorious. Obviously, I worship her. I told you she was a street kid and I was a street kid. Our ages were different, but we had that thread in common. She also taught me lots of things that should have been taught to me by my mother or the Rosses. She's the one who told me what it was going to be like when I grew up, when I would get my friend, as we used to call it. We were that close. And then Mel came along, and there was great laughter.
Mel Brooks?
Yes, Mel
Right,
Brooks,
right.
excuse me.
No, that's good.
Great laughter in Annie's dressing room all the time. And I remember sitting on Mel Brooks's lap.
When the Miracle Worker was such a success on stage, did things change between you and the Rosses? Or did they begin to
yes.
change? How so?
They became much more protective, much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, they tightened the reins. I could have no friends.
More controlling?
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. I went to school for a while. I could not have a friend. There was no such thing as calling friends from school or anything like that. They were very careful about anybody who talked to me, anyone in show business, anyone who could be another agent or manager. And the controls got tighter and tighter and tighter through the years. The more success, which came from them, they fulfilled their promise to my mother. They made me a star. And then they couldn't enjoy it.
So when the run was over in 1961, how did that affect you? How did you feel?
Heartbroken. Annie left. Annie Bancroft left 6 months before I did. She had stayed 3 months longer than she wanted to because of me. Excuse me. When she left, Suzanne Plachette took her place. Suzanne was a wonderful actress and a terrific person. If Jesus Christ had come down to play Annie Sullivan, it wouldn't have been good enough. Poor Suzanne took a beating. I mean, I was really buff by now. And this was a slender, young, 21-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. Oh, I gave her tough time. And then I fell in love with her. She was very different than Annie. She had fur-lined, sable-lined coats and things that she let me wear. She was fun.
Did it affect your career at that point when the show ended?
I don't know. We went right into making the movie. So the end wasn't until really the end of summer of 61. Yeah, 61.
Yeah, 61 it ended, and the movie was, well, I know it came out in 62.
Right.
So, well, but was it a sure thing? Was it a sure thing that you and Anne Bancroft would be cast in the movie, or was
No,
there...
it was not a sure thing. You know very well that many Broadway plays go to movies and they cast other people.
Exactly.
So, remember the 2 inches? Mm-hmm. We were very nervous about that. And of course, if someone else had played it, I think I would be dead.
Because you were 14,
mine.
or you were.
I was 14 by the time we did it, and I still looked. There are a couple of scenes where you can see me maybe looking a little taller, maybe a little more mature, but we got by.
So, what tricks did you use in preparing, including physical things that you did, to maybe appear younger in the movie?
Well, so much had been done on the stage that was a part of me, and I had done that at a younger age, so I kept those things. I kind of scrunched more. I mean, I knew once we were shooting a week, they weren't going to replace me. But it lingered in there, which probably kept me on my toes.
Well, I just saw it again for the second time in my life yesterday.
Oh, is that right?
Many years ago, and there was a certain wildness that you really captured that seemed to, it would be distracting from anything else about your age, I think.
I think so. I think that had a lot to do with it. There was a cat-like thing about my Helen. You never knew when it was going to shoot someplace else.
Was there any huge differences between the stage version and the film version?
Very little. Of course, as with any transition from stage to screen, you sort of bring some of the things down because on the stage you're reaching the back of the house and the lens is right here. So there were some things that were diminished, but mostly we did what we did on the stage.
What about you'd already had a lot of experience in front of a camera with the live television, but what about the challenges of doing this for a camera rather than a live audience, Miracle Worker, for the movie?
There were challenges. Part of the being wild had to stay within a frame. On the stage, I made big noises, kind of thing. That had to be toned down, just because it, made the speakers go crazy. Other than that, they changed the end, which I didn't like. In the play, the end was at the pump. Teacher said, "I love Helen." And that was it. I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. In the movie, the pump scene happens, and then they go to a scene later at night where I come out and kiss teacher, and she says, "I love Helen." I think they didn't need to do that, but that's my personal opinion, and it's the first time I've ever expressed it.
So, you won an Academy Award for that performance.
I did.
Best Supporting Actress.
The role won the award.
You inhabited the role, and at the time, I think that was
I
the youngest.
did my job really well, and I'm not saying I didn't deserve.
I believe you were the
Oscar.
youngest winner in that category
At the time.
At that time.
At that time, I was the youngest, and of course, the Rosses loved anything that was the first, or the youngest, or the best. There was a bit of a dark side to winning the Oscar, to the actual night. My mother was not allowed to come. Ethel made a dress for me instead of store-bought gown. She made the dress, but she got on an alcoholic binge and she didn't finish the top. So basically I was wearing the lining of the dress up here and the very pretty part of the dress down there. So I felt like I didn't belong. Ethel also brought her little chihuahua in her purse. When I called my mother after the ceremony, of course she was thrilled. And she said, "Did they bring the dog?" And that told me how heavy her heart was. My father, I was told through the years, was in a bar and watched it on the TV. And I'm told he said, That's my Riri. That was his nickname for me from Anna Marie. So I know that he saw it, which is an incredible thrill.
So it sounds like it was mixed emotions for you that night,
Yes.
because you must have gotten all these accolades from...
Oh my God, Joan Crawford told me I was wonderful. Gregory Peck. I met Gregory Peck. I mean, all of it was truly a wonderland, except for this little shadow. And the Oscar is indeed heavy.
And you were living still on the East Coast. You were still in New York, right? And
Yes.
came out to LA,
Yes,
right?
we
or
came
Hollywood.
out for the awards.
So you continued on. You had this great honor of winning the Oscar. You did a show called The Power and the Glory with Laurence Olivier. Was that a live television?
That was a
drama?
live television show, one of the David Susskind productions. Again, I was very young still and not really educated in the theater. So, of course, I had heard of Sir Laurence Olivier. When we went to rehearsals, it was in a kind of a warehouse downtown in New York. And they would set up long tables and we would sit around and read our parts. Well, the very first day, I got off the elevator and there was a man sitting over there, and he looked up and nodded, and I said hello. And then other people came and blah, 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 and they were paying a lot of attention to this man. And then we were called into another room to do our scenes one by one. And when I was called in, that man was there. And I realized, that's Sir Laurence Olivier. And what a gentle, kind soul. He was so caring of me. And of course, I was gaga for him. And we had one little scene in a barn. He's hiding in the hay. And I find him. And I decide I will protect him. And we're talking and we're talking. And each one of us is underplaying the other. I'm not realizing it, but he goes down, I go down. He goes down. Finally, the director came over the PA system and said, "We can't hear you. Can you please give us at least something to record?" So we did.
So the Patty Duke Show came along pretty soon after, 1963.
Yep.
How did that come about?
Again, the Rosses were always making and doing. Mr. Ross had, ABC was interested in doing a show with me. Somehow he negotiated that it would be called The Patty Duke Show. A kids' show named The Patty Duke Show? Anyway, Sidney Sheldon and Peter Lawford and Bill Asher were the producers, and Sidney wrote it. He asked that I spend a week or so with his family and him so that he could get a kind of an idea, because nobody knew what the show was going to be. It was just the Patty Duke Show. So I spent the week, and it was wonderful. They had a big, glamorous house, and they were gracious and kind, and the food was great. And after I left, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, Sidney decided that he wanted both sides of my personality to be represented. And that's how he invented Identical Cousins.
So that might have been another first too. I don't know that there was anyone younger than you who had a self-titled show at that time.
I believe that's true, but I can't swear to it.
So no other titles were ever considered. It was always going to be the Patty Duke show, right?
Patty Duke show, which was actually, in time, burdensome. You know, your name is on there. You better keep up to the bar.
So, for those who don't know, what was the basic premise of the show?
The basic premise of the show was that Patty Lane and Kathy Lane, as I said, were identical cousins. Nobody ever challenged that genetically. It just, Sidney said it was, and it was. Kathy came from General Europe. At first she was supposed to come from Scotland, and I did the Scottish accent so well they couldn't understand me. So they made it a general whatever. Anyway, she came to live with Patty and the rest of the Lane family, a mother, father, brother, and boyfriend, Eddie Applegate. They would trade places, play tricks on people, use each other to get out of scams that they would, mostly Patty would invent. Kathy was my favorite because she was calm and sedate and spoke nicely. I didn't like Patty. She embarrassed me.
Were these two sides of you to some degree?
Oh, yeah. Oh, he nailed it. Absolutely nailed it on the head. Who knew that he was prescient and I would eventually be diagnosed bipolar?
And Kathy was quiet and smart and refined. And dressed that way, the hair, the look.
Well, actually, they dressed her dowdy, in my opinion.
Patty was the all-American wild kind of teenager with crazy ideas and all that.
Crazy ideas, and was going to fulfill them no matter what. But that show had something that I don't think shows have had until now, maybe Modern Family. That family had a father and a mother who were the head of the household. These kids may have played these pranks and all that, but there were consequences. And there was a wonderful relationship between Patty and her father. He was usually the one passing down the wisdom or passing down the consequence. Jean Byron, who played Mamo, didn't really get that much to do.
It's funny you say Mamo.
Mamo.
I remember that.
Papo and Mamo.
It was hip, kind of, yeah.
Bill Asher used to say, "Chicky baby, come on, Chicky baby, let's go. Get the energy in there, Chicky baby." He just passed recently. He was something.
But
he was the director.
Right. But was there an irony about that show because the character of Patty on the show, was that kind of far removed from your actual experience growing up as a teenager?
Oh yes, I had no idea what a regular teenager was. I didn't have any friends. I didn't go to sock hops. I didn't even listen to much rock and roll. Occasionally, I would in the car, and then they'd turn it off. So actually, I had to observe teenagers before I played that part.
And I assume the scripts were written by, mostly probably men, but who were way past their teenage years.
Exactly.
So did you even know when the dialogue didn't even ring true to what?
I did, but I didn't have, even though the name was on there, I didn't have the authority or the guts to say, you know what, people don't talk like this. I just, said that's the line, and I had to say it.
So when you first heard about the concept for the show, what did you think? I mean, did you think this is going to be a challenge or
I knew it was going to be a challenge. and I didn't know how I would do it. I knew eventually that they were not going to be two whole people. In order to create one, I had to take away from the other, or add to Patty, let's say, energy to Patty that Kathy didn't have. And that was the best device I could come up with to make them different.
Was that something you worked out before you started the show, or did it kind of come along as you got
evolved.
into it?
It definitely evolved, and Bill Asher was incredibly helpful. He had worked with Lucy for years. He even stole a scene from Lucy to have me do, and I didn't do it nearly as well as she did.
Did you enjoy playing Kathy more than Patty?
Yes.
Why?
Because I liked the earnestness of her. She seemed more mature. And remember, I was getting older. And I wanted my maturity to be respected. And it wasn't. Until I had a crush on the assistant director. And I pursued him for a season. The next season, he went to work on another show to get away from me. He was much older than me. When he came back, I pursued him again. And we wound up married. I was 18. I had had no experience. I was not marriage material. And of course, my illness was also getting worse. So that lasted only 3 years.
What was his name?
Harry Falk, Jr.
Mm-hmm. So the scene you mentioned, the Lucy scene, what was that?
It's the one with the mirror. She did it with Harpo Marx.
Right.
Where they do the thing, and what they did for us was they filmed me doing Patty, and then they ran it while I was doing Kathy on the other side. It didn't quite come out as crisp and true as Lucy had done it.
So let's talk a little more about that, and also the technical part of playing opposite yourself. You couldn't be in the room, obviously. And also there are stand-ins and things like that. On a scene like that, when you said they played it back, were you able to, in real time, see what your counterpart was doing to be able to mimic it? Yes,
but I was not good enough. I have trouble counting. You know, they say 5, 6, 7, 8, and I freeze. I'm dancing in a show that we're having here, and boy, I'm practicing 5, 6, 7, 8 a lot. So that's why the Harpo steel that we did, it was used in the beginning of the series, but eventually they faded it away.
Okay. We're going to change tape and